and for you to tell me what's on your mind. And so that's kind of the purpose of it. I'll just say a couple things to start, just about kind of what we've been doing lately, but then I'll certainly open it up for questions. So a lot of people have been contacting the office about this IRS stuff. On Friday, there was this issue of Lois Lerner testifying before our committee on oversight and taking the Fifth Amendment rather than answer questions for the American people. And you have a right to do that. The problem is the way that is applied is you want to remain silent, you can. What you can't do is tell your side of the story and then invoke the Fifth Amendment so you don't have to answer questions under cross-examination. That's not the way it works. Otherwise, a witness could take the stand, say, oh yeah, I'm innocent of that, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't do that. Okay, Fifth Amendment, I'm going to sit down. And you don't have a chance to have the truth elicited through cross-examination. So she tried to pull that stunt. So what we did was we basically voted in the committee about, okay, did she waive her Fifth Amendment right? And I think she did waive her Fifth Amendment right. She could have gone there and said Fifth Amendment and got out of there, and that would have been fine. But she chose to make all these factual assertions of her. And so you can't do that. So basically what that means is she's going to have to make a determination about whether she wants to come and answer the questions because we found the waiver of her right, or whether she still wants to say, no, I was entitled to make all these statements and still invoke the Fifth Amendment. In which case, if that happens, then you're looking at perhaps contempt of Congress. Maybe there'll be some type of negotiation with the committee where there can be like a limited immunity. I'm not saying I would necessarily support that. It would depend on the evidence she's going to put forward and testify to. But there's a lot of frustration about why nothing really ever seems to happen with people who commit misconduct in the bureaucracy. We had another guy take the Fifth from the IRS in front of the committee last week. So this is not like she's the only one. I mean, you're seeing this. You're seeing millions and millions of dollars wasted by the IRS and some other agencies. And yet when you do something wrong, it seems that you kind of get placed on leave, you still get paid, and you don't end up ever losing your job or anything like that. There's not really much of a criminal investigation. And part of the problem is in Congress, we are Article 1 of the Constitution. We are a legislative branch. And the way the separation of powers works, there are certain functions that are legislative in nature. For example, we draft and vote on statutes. We actually make laws. So that's why if a president will unilaterally do some of these things by executive order that are essentially legislating, that is not consistent with separation of powers. The president can't simply unilaterally, for example, the immigration bill, he can't unilaterally institute that without it passing Congress.
So why does he?
Well,
how can he get away with that?
Well, he hasn't done that quite yet, so we'll see what happens. So then the issue with us is, we have legislative powers, but we don't have executive powers. We don't conduct criminal investigations and do criminal prosecutions. That's just not what the legislative branch does. And so we really are not we can bring witnesses in, put them under oath, investigate, put out facts for the American people. We can try to address certain things in the bureaucracy with policy changes. I think we should do that. For example, if you have to take the Fifth Amendment before Congress, you need to lose your job. I mean, it's just, you can't keep getting paid if you're not willing to tell the truth. You have a right to not say anything, but the idea that you have a right to still remain on the payroll, to me, that doesn't work. So there are things we can do, but what we can't do is indict somebody and prosecute him, because it's just not in our constitutional set of powers. And so what that means is, if you hold somebody in contempt of Congress, or if you're just doing a routine criminal investigation, that's got to be done by somebody in the executive branch. And right now that means the Department of Justice, or it means appointment of a special prosecutor, but in either instance, you're not apt to get very effective investigations being done.
How about a new amendment to the Constitution? Why don't we get that? An amendment to the Constitution.
To do what?
To prosecute a lot of these people that are lying all the time.
Well,
it's going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, you're probably not going to amend the Constitution to address individual cases. And quite frankly, I don't want Congress to become a criminal investigative body and prosecute. I mean, it should be done by the executive. I just wish I think this Attorney General, we had the FBI Director Mueller in front of Judiciary a couple weeks ago, and he was asked by one of my colleagues, what's the status of the IRS investigation? He said, well, he's like, I don't really know, I haven't really discussed it with anybody recently. Okay, well, who is actually leading the investigation? Well, I don't know. I haven't really. It's like, so that tells me if you don't even know who's leading the investigation, then you're probably not that committed to really getting to the truth. And so that's just an unfortunate fact of of where we are. So we're going to continue to conduct oversight. I've embraced a lot of policy proposals that would even eliminate the IRS and go to a fair or flat tax. I think that would be a good thing to do. But, in terms of holding individuals accountable, we are just limited in how it works. And so it's not right. It's not great. I wish there were some ways. And I think also it's problematic because we had the IRS head from 2008 to 12 come before the committee a month ago or so, and he was asked if he takes responsibility for the admitted misconduct that happened in his agency, and he said, well, he's like, it happened on my watch, but I'm not responsible for anything that happened. And, I just thought to myself, I'm a Navy guy, if you were captaining a ship in the Navy and the ship runs aground, the captain of the ship cannot say, yeah, the ship ran aground on my watch, but it was actually some E5 that made a mistake. He's responsible. I'm not responsible. That would never be acceptable. You would immediately lose your command, and there would be someone would be held responsible. But when we see things that happen in the bureaucracy, basically people say, oh, mistakes were made. Yes, there was somebody that committed misconduct, this or that, but no one really takes responsibility. Nobody is really ever held accountable.
Well, when will they ever, if you don't do anything about it?
I don't think that you can, sustain this where you have a bureaucracy that's not accountable in any way to the public, and that actually the level of conduct is beneath what you would expect in the private sector or even in the military, even other government institutions. And so it's very, very frustrating and troubling. What can we do about it? The problem is we can investigate, we can put the facts out there, we can make policy changes, but those policy changes can't just be done by the House. You'd have to have the Senate concur, you'd have the President agree to some of this stuff, and there's not much of an appetite in the White House to deal with this. David Axelrod was the President's main political guy, and he basically said, look, the government is too big for the President to know what's going on in the agencies that he oversees. And that's a very stunning statement, because that's not, the Founding Fathers believed that ultimately the President was responsible for his administration. And Congress conducts oversight, but you would police your own administration at a minimum, and that seems to have really broken down. So it's frustrating. We're continuing to work on it.
There's nothing we can do.
Well,
what can we do?
I think that...
You don't have an amendment, you can't prosecute, like you say, there's nothing we can do. So why is he here?
Well, you can do... No, part of this is having to do with using this in the electoral process to elect people who are more faithful. If all this stuff had come out in the middle of 2012, it would have been a huge issue in the election, but basically it was tampered down until the election was over. And if you're not doing good administering the laws, the founders expected the public to take issue with that at the ballot box. And so the people do have the ability to do something about it. It's just because you just had the election.
If you vote him in, like you say, you can't do anything. We get the right guys, but they say, well, our hands are tied. We can't do anything.
Well, I didn't say you can't do anything. It's just you can't, in the House, we cannot criminally prosecute people from the House. And we just can't do it.
Pressure Boehner for a select committee.
What's that?
Pressure Boehner for a select committee.
Well, I support a select committee.
They say it will take too long, and that's why they don't do it.
That's what they did with Nixon.
They said they're going to be behind closed doors. That's
well, here's the thing with the select, Benghazi particularly, and here's why you need a select committee, I think, because, we did a hearing on oversight about Benghazi. So we had these State Department guys, they talked about, the one guy got demoted because he started speaking out about falsehoods that were being put out about basically covering up what had happened. He talked to the Special Ops Lieutenant Colonel was told to stand down. The colonel was told to stand down and told Greg Hicks this. So this was something that we were concerned about. You know, why was there no assets marshaled during this whole time? The Pentagon said, well, we wouldn't have been able to get anyone there in time. The problem is you don't know how long this is going to last when you first get attacked. This could have lasted 72 hours. So the idea that we knew that Doherty and Hicks were going to die at 5:15 the next morning is a fantasy. We didn't know that. But the problem is so we raise all these questions on oversight, but then you have armed services who's interviewing some of these people. We're interviewing some of these people. You have potentially other committees, and so it's all just kind of a conglomeration, and it would help to have one committee that could solely focus on it. But we've kind of gone far enough. I mean, I don't know that the speaker's going to do it. Like I said, I signed on to it. I think it would be smart. And it's just not good if you're doing this with all these different committees. At some point, you know, you need a unified effort who can just focus on. And with oversight, you know, we have to do all these other things too. You know, we have oversight over waste in the bureaucracy. You know, the IRS, you know, they spent over $50 million in conferences over the last 2 years. They're doing these things in California, $3,500 a night suites. They spend $50,000 to create a Star Trek parody video in which the guy who testified was Mr. Spock. And when he was asked, well, you know, what do you say? The taxpayer says, well, I'm sorry. You know, just imagine if the IRS came after you and your response was, hey, I'm sorry, leave me alone. They're probably not going to accept that. We asked them, well, you know, what made you think this was okay? And he said, well, we couldn't identify a regulation that said we couldn't do the video. And this is just kind of the mindset that, I mean, at some point you need common sense and respect for taxpayers, and obviously that broke down in this instance. But so we got to do all that oversight as well, and so select committee would be good. But that's just kind of where we're at. You've been having your hand up.
I have a question concerning what you were saying about the special prosecutor. How do you create a special prosecutor? I mean, do you need both houses?
No, it's basically
committee.
It's done by the Justice Department. So they used to have an independent counsel statute where that could be triggered if something happened. It would be triggered. That lapsed about a decade ago. And I actually think it was unconstitutional because it's basically taking executive functions and putting them in the legislative branch. But so the bottom line is, what typically happens is if there's a reason to think that it's not good to investigate yourself, that there would be public pressure, and the Attorney General would appoint a special prosecutor.
But we have an Attorney General that we need a special prosecutor.
Yeah, we got a prosecutor.
Well, that's why it's such a problem, because if he's not interested in really getting to the bottom of this, he's interested in protecting the administration. And so that's why it's frustrating. You know, he came before Judiciary, and he really wouldn't answer any of our questions about some of the stuff with investigating the press. And even if he did appoint a special prosecutor, you know, I worry that he could appoint someone that's just going to run interference on this thing. So the FBI says they're investigating, but you know, when the FBI director doesn't even know who's running the investigation, that tells me it's a very low priority.
With the separation of powers, the executive branch being in charge of Holder and protecting Holder, and Holder turning around and protecting the executive branch, how do you get a wedge in there?
Well, he is, and they're all the executive branch, and so he's a subordinate officer in the executive branch. Well, we're pursuing the Holder situation in terms of his potentially false statements in front of the committee. You know, I want to have another public hearing on that. I think it's important that the public get to hear that. And I've asked for Holder to resign. We got about 122 House members that say he should resign. I think it would be good for the president politically if Holder resigned, but I think that they realize he's a lightning rod, but that he's willing to take a lot of the heat away from the administration. So it's just kind of where we find ourselves in, and you know, not having the Senate is tough too, because you have one house, and you can stop things with one house, but it's hard to move a pressure point in that respect.
Right. Good morning. Good morning.
Hey.
First, I'd like to thank you for coming to Ormond Beach and giving me the opportunity to speak with you.
Sure.
I'd also like to thank you for your service in uniform, as well as a member of Congress. And since you sit on the Foreign Relations Committee, I have a question that comes to Pakistan. Okay? I know it's a very complex issue, and it's a very loaded issue. I've taken the time to be brief. I just have a couple of bullet point items that I'd like to read for your benefit and for the people that are here. Yes, quick. Yeah, quick. My interest pertains to the imprisonment of Dr. Shakil Afridi, who's a Pakistani doctor who was sentenced to 33 years in prison for aiding our CIA and being instrumental in bringing to justice Osama bin Laden. And our government has been mute on this subject. They may be going through backdoor channels. I have no knowledge of that. But for your benefit, it'll only take a second. I just like to read you a chain of events. Number one, the New York Times on May 30th, 2012. The headline of that article was "New Details Emerge on Conviction of Pakistani Who Aided Bin Laden's Search." In February 27th, 2013, your colleague, Congressman Rohrabacher from California, brought forth a resolution on the floor of the Congress that the government of the United States should immediately demand the release of Dr. Afridi. On March 6th, I directed a correspondence to your office in Washington. On April 22nd, I emailed to your attention. I faxed your office.
Would you like us to support this man? I don't think we have time to go over this whole
No.
We agree. Let's support this, but let's go on to other people.
I'm about done. So
Good.
if you don't mind, it may not be important to you, but it's important.
Finish.
It's important to me.
And your points
Your point to really?
Just finish.
So I'd like to ask you, Congressman, what is your position on that issue today? And what is our government doing about getting him out and bringing him to this country and his family, which is what he wants?
I can't speak for the administration. I think when someone helps us, we need to stand by them. So I agree with Congressman Rohrabacher on that. And I certainly would support. Now, we haven't done anything on the Foreign Affairs Committee to deal with the resolution that he did, but that would be something that I would support. And I would certainly urge the administration to bring him here. And it's the least we can do for him helping our country bring somebody to justice who deserves it.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Can I leave this with your staff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.
Future of Obamacare, sir.
Who?
The future of Obamacare.
So, when this was passed, they said, look, we need to do this so we can reduce insurance premiums for the average American. They said, look, you've got uninsured people going to the emergency room. It drives up costs for everybody else. If we do Obamacare, they're going to be in these Obamacare exchanges, and so you're going to have lower costs, $2,500 on average per family. That was kind of the core argument. We know that not only is the insurance premiums not going down by that much, they're going up by that much. And so that core promise was a promise that was obviously not kept, and it was something that was predictable that it would not happen. What you're starting to see, I think, is the sticker shock start to set in. When it passed, it was delayed before it was implemented. So 2011, 2012, people who really follow this closely knew. But if you're just kind of going about your business, working your job, it wasn't something that was necessarily on the top of your mind. Now people are starting to see that. You're also starting to see that the cost to the government, they said that actually this is going to reduce the deficit. A huge bill is going to reduce the deficit. What we've seen is going to cost way more than what they said. And so that's another broken promise. You also see individual aspects.
I've got a question. How can they make it pass when nobody read it? I never understood that. Even
Let's hear the explanation. Let's hear the explanation.
I can address that. And now we're starting to see individual aspects of the law. So for example, they decided, they wanted to do taxes. So one of the taxes that they did was to tax medical device manufacturers. And basically the tax is whatever receipt you bring in, there's a tax on that, even if you're not profitable. Well, what we're seeing is that's actually hitting people who do these medical devices, and it's hitting them in a way that's causing them to do less research and development. So if you're doing less research and development to create new life-saving medical devices, down the line we can confidently say that that's going to cost lives. I mean, it is. Because if they're developing new products, there are products on the market now that 30 years ago, if you didn't have, you probably would not even be here. We see new ones coming up. So it's you know, the tax is bad enough, but to tax innovation like that, it's a very destructive tax. And so we're already seeing different manufacturers having problems, jobs are being lost, even really left-wing senators like Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts have said, look, this is not a good tax. So there's all these things that are brewing that are creating more and more disapproval. It's never been popular, but the disapproval rating is higher today than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And so I think what's going to happen is there's going to be more problems with the implementation. It's not going to be ready in October. You're going to see higher costs, higher premiums, destructive taxes, and it's going to be an issue in next year's elections. I think it may be one of the biggest issues. And so there's going to be a lot of senators who are up for the first time since they voted for it in 2010. And yes, they did not, there's no way anyone read it and understands. It's too big of a law. There's just no way. And so the American people have a chance to render a judgment on that. I don't think it was as big an issue in 2012 because of 2 reasons: the delay in implementation and the fact that the Republican nominee also had a health plan in Massachusetts that had an individual mandate. Now, there are actually a lot of differences between what he did in Massachusetts and what Obamacare is, but it was tough to make the argument. And so now I think it's going to continue to be an issue. We voted to just repeal it outright. Yep. We may vote to repeal the medical device tax, some of these other things. And but the problem is that the Senate, they basically believe in it. You have 50-some senators who believe in it, and they're going to stick with it until thick or thin. So the only thing that can really change it is the American people to hold those people accountable.
Excellent. Thank you,
now,
sir.
what do you want to change it to? Because all you Republicans, all you want to do is get rid of it, but that still leaves tens of millions of people without any health care.
Well, first of all, Obamacare,
So
you're still going to have 30 million without health insurance.
Yeah, but what are your plans?
Well, I know, but the idea that you're leaving people if you repeal Obamacare, the promise of kind of universal coverage, it's not going to happen.
It depends on what state
People
you live
have already
in.
acknowledged.
In California, where they've set up exchanges, it's working very well. In states where they haven't bothered to send up exchanges like Florida, we have nothing.
Well,
So it depends on which state you're working in. This is not a blanket.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who disagree with the California analysis, and people have said that it's increased
Well,
costs
you can find
and
a
made it
lot
more
of people
difficult.
anywhere that disagree
Well, here
with
we are.
anything. But it doesn't mean it isn't working.
Go to barackobama.com/healthcare and get the truth for yourself.
So here's what I would say, though, about that. One, there is a bill that I support, put in by Representative Tom Price, who's a doctor, and it basically lays out a series of reforms. I think part of the problem with Obamacare is this idea of mandating all this comprehensive insurance. The problem is that puts all the costs on a third party payer, so an individual doesn't have, you have no market forces at work. And so what we would want to do is allow people to have more kind of catastrophic insurance plans, have the ability to save tax-free for small medical expenses, and then in this sense, you would be able to actually know if you have to do a routine checkup or something, how much something costs. You can shop around. If you don't have any consumer price signals, you're never going to reduce costs. So we're trying to do that.
We have catastrophic insurance now, but what you've got is you've got a lot of people that don't qualify or can't afford it.
Ron, how can we stop these omnibus bills? I think they're unbelievably wasteful in how they pack them. I know that the House is working on immigration a bite at a time, but...
So the omnibus bill, so you have, obviously we're talking about the health care bill, 2,500 pages. We recently did a farm bill that was, we've actually voted it down. It was about $1 trillion over 10 years, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and what they do is they'll combine all these different things into one bill. So the farm bill, it's got corporate welfare, it's got agriculture price supports, it's got welfare and food stamps, and basically you combine more and more things into one bill and try to buy more and more people to vote for it. So you kind of hold your nose or something in it that you want. And the person that gets left behind on that is the American taxpayer.
Is it up to the leadership of the...
It's up to, yeah, but I mean, you know, this is just the way Washington works. And so what we did with the Farm Bill is a lot of us said, well, wait a minute. You know, they say it's going to cost about $1 trillion over 10 years. But if you actually look at the last two Farm Bills, they underestimated the cost 30% in 2002 and 51% in 2008. So let's just split the difference on that and say they've underestimated this by 40%. You're looking at about $1.4 trillion over 10 years. That's actually more than Obamacare which will cost over the first 10. It's going to cost more than that over the next 10. And so, man, so we're saying you need to split this stuff up, consider individual bills, and try to generate good policy. That's better for taxpayers. It's ultimately better for the economy. But the reason why there's resistance to that is because the more you pack in one bill, the easier it is to escape scrutiny on a corporate welfare provision or certain things like that. You know, there were a lot of Democrats who opposed with some of the welfare that you would have for an able-bodied person to have some work requirements, or at least a requirement that you look for work. I don't know how you could oppose that. I mean, you're getting public assistance. The goal is not to be on public assistance forever, but to give you a safety net so you can get back on your feet and be independent. And if you're saying that nobody has to work, even if you're able-bodied, then you're basically just saying that you can continue to be, you know, in that state. And that's obviously, it's not good for a taxpayer, but it's not good for those individuals if you structure the program to prolong their stay on it. The immigration bill is over 1,200 pages. And if you look in that, there's stimulus spending in there. It has nothing to do with immigration. There are earmarks in that bill that give Harry Reid specific benefits for Nebraska or Nevada tourism. And that's just the way Washington works. And so it's funny because, you know, people say, oh, you know, you gotta, you gotta do, you know, just get together, come to a compromise. The problem is, the immigration bill, they go behind closed doors. You'll get people from both parties. They collude. They're not really compromising to help the taxpayer or the public. They're basically doing it to help themselves and to help their pet issues. And by having a bigger bill, they're able to slip this stuff in there, and all of a sudden that gets enacted into law. So things that cannot stand on their own, that's how they try to do it. So anytime there's a vehicle like that, people will put a bunch of different stuff on there. Yes, sir.
Well, then why doesn't Congress change their
no
in-house rules?
Why can't they change?
Because the reason why is because... Okay, so someone... Oh, sorry, guys. Someone asked, why doesn't Congress change the rules? Why do you guys even allow there to be all these big omnibus bills with all this stuff packed in? And the reason is there's not a majority of Congress who thinks those bills are bad yet. I mean, we had all these amendments for the Farm Bill, and the only one we were successful on to reduce spending was we cut out a program for millions of dollars for sheep shearing instruction. Now, there were other ones to cut out corporate welfare, to cut out things that really are just giveaways, and you get to about 170, 180 votes out of 435, and it just stalls out. So there's not a majority of people in the House right now who want to go in a different direction.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying the Senate has a set of rules that they work under. The House has a set of rules that you guys create within yourselves. Now the Senate,
on a majority vote.
When the Senate comes and does their rules, they say, well, okay, anytime a bill comes, we can add amendments. It doesn't matter what it pertains to. They stick it on. Look at the IRS, the immigration bill. It had 564 amendments to it. Okay. Now, when the House does their
but that was just there may have been 564 submitted. They only debated 9 amendments, so it was not an open process. It was a closed process.
No, I know
the fix was in on that.
I know that, but that's what they do. That's how the Senate gets their stuff put in that doesn't even pertain to the bill. Now, when you come to your House and you guys do bills over there, your rules state that the amendments have to pertain to the bill that they're talking about. Okay? That's what I read on the computer and through your web.
But that is based on a ruling from the Rules Committee, so they can basically say whatever they want is germane or not germane. And so if they want certain things to be considered, they can do it. Yes, there are certain limitations that we have. For example, we have an appropriations bill. We did the Department of Homeland Security bill. What I wanted to do was do an amendment that would condition the salaries of Napolitano and her executive team on following the law by constructing the border fence and implementing an entry-exit system. I was not allowed to do that because that's considered legislating in an appropriations bill. I can bar the use of funds for something, but I can't make them conditional on other things. But when you get into normal legislating, this all goes through a rules committee, and so they're able to do it, and the leadership's able to structure it the way that they want to. But the rules of the House are the way they develop, and most people on both sides of the aisle, at least the senior people who've been around for a while, they don't want to, change. They basically both want to keep things pretty similar to the way they operate now. So I think that's a mistake, and I think that there's a lot of...
Else, you get the old ones that are still in there that say, well, this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way we're going to do it.
And that's
unfortunate. And unfortunately, that makes people think, well, now we should really consider term limits for all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we should do term limits for sure. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. We'll come back to you.
Okay. I'd like to remark number one on the Obama health care.
Okay.
And what is happening with our doctors, foreseeing what's coming down the pike. My wife and I had seen the same primary physician for years. All of a sudden, my physician went from 5 employees to 2, and he joined in with Florida Healthcare. I'm sorry, we don't take United Healthcare. We have to go elsewhere. So now she has to look for a doctor. That's number one. Second example, my brother-in-law went in for his yearly checkup last week, and his doctor told him, this is your last insurance covered exam. From here on in, you either pay on call or you go on a monthly budget with us, but we are not submitting any more claims.
So
and lastly is, we've got now doctors reaching 65-year-old, they're bailing out.
So basically he's talking about, I'm just telling the people in the other room about some of the changes that we're seeing with the healthcare law, insurance not accepted at the same doctors that they were, doctors cutting back on employees, sending, what was the last one?
Well,
what's
not
that?
accepting Medicare or private.
Okay, yeah. So not accepting certain things. So is that, you just wanted to let us know that, or do you have a question?
Well, I just wanted.
Well, you don't need to have a question. I mean, part of this is you guys saying, "Hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I want you to know," and it's actually very helpful to me to get you guys to do that. So
I do appreciate also, because I covered this. I just wanted to bring it to their attention since it came up. But you've already answered 2 separate questions that I sent you, and I do appreciate that greatly, because the other one was with immigration.
Okay.
They want to build more fences and hire more people. All we have to do is enforce the laws that we presently have on the books, and don't handcuff our police. And that's coming from a legal immigrant, okay?
No, I hear you. The issue, though, and the reason why the fencing, particularly the double fencing with an access road, is technically, if you enforce the law, you probably wouldn't need that. But the American public does not have any confidence, not only in this administration, who only enforces the laws they like, but really the administrations for the last 20 years to actually enforce it. So the idea is, if you have a fence, they don't go on strike, they don't ask for salary increases, they can't refuse. I mean, the fence is the fence, and so it's not like the ideal thing, but when you have an administration and an executive branch generally, spanning multiple administrations, who do not enforce the law, then you've got to figure out a way, okay, how can we, protect legal immigrants' rights who come here through the right channels, protect the American people, protect our sovereignty, do that in a way that's most effective. And so that's kind of why but I appreciate that. Okay, back over here. Yes, I will. Yep.
Ron, first thing, thank you for your service. And as a veteran, please say our TRICARE benefits for not only veterans but for our active duty military. There's some things on the table today that are really going to make it bad for us, those that serve. And please do everything to protect our First and our Second Amendment rights.
Absolutely. So basically, veterans saying protect TRICARE and constitutional freedoms. Yes, sir. We're going into here. I'll repeat the question.
I'm an immigrant and I'm Hispanic. And I learned English before coming to the United States. What's the chance of making English the official language of the United States?
Amen.
Well, I can tell you right now, it's not going to happen in that immigration bill. I mean, basically, what they said was, how it was initially written is, you know, the politicians will say, oh, you got to learn English. Well, if you actually read the text of the law as it was originally written, it said, you have to demonstrate that you are intending to pursue a course of study. Now, they say they've strengthened that language. I haven't looked at the final bill yet because I don't think the House is going to take it up. But, you know, and so a lot of these things where they say, hey, you're going to have to learn, it's not going to happen. No. And in fact, the law gives Janet Napolitano the ability to waive any of those requirements. So, you know, it's like saying, oh, and then they said, oh, they're going to have to pay back taxes. But if you actually read the bill, it will say that if you have an outstanding assessment from the IRS, then you must pay that before you receive legal status. Well, gee, I hope so. But if someone's been working for 10 years off the books, there's no requirement that they pay the taxes that they haven't paid for any of that other stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear you. Look, you speak whatever language that you want, but in terms of the language of government, the language to have success, you're just not going to be as successful as you could be in America, I mean, if you don't learn English. And so it's a good message, and I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Ron. Thanks for coming. The question I have is, you're obviously not going to get any cooperation from the Department of Justice, the IRS, the Treasury, the State Department. Please give us some assurance that you have control of the purse strings for the expansion of the IRS.
So the question is okay, you know, a lot of this stuff we've been talking about is executive branch stuff. You know, we can't necessarily make Holder investigate or not, but what we can do is use the power of the purse. And I'm all for that. I mean, we tried to do that already with the healthcare, with the CR. That didn't end up being successful. But for example, people like Lois Lerner getting bonuses. I mean, there's no reason why we can't completely eliminate bonuses for people who were caught up in misconduct and just slow down the gravy train generally. I think you should defund any IRS involvement in health care. I don't trust the IRS to get involved in your health care or my health care. It's just not an appropriate thing for them. They should have never been tasked with this in the first place. And if you look at how they've handled these political groups who've applied for tax-exempt status, just imagine if they have access to all your personal health care information. You know, it's frightening. Yes?
I'd like to know how we're going to go against the conflict of interest of having senators, congresspeople like Stephen Fincher of Tennessee, who has personally profited by being on the Agriculture Committee to the tune of over $3 million from 1999 to 2012, simply because he has land in Tennessee.
Because of like direct payments for farmers?
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think that you know, paying people not to farm is just bad policy.
And
it's
having
just
a congressman profit from it? How about bankers who are on the banking committee who want to deregulate?
Well, look, I mean, in terms of, you know, if you're a farmer and you know, you got to make the votes that you want to make the votes, but I think when you have somebody, if they advocate direct payments and then they're getting direct payments, you know, I think that's something that their constituents can absolutely use, but it's just inappropriate to have this direct payment system because it creates perverse incentive and it's basically crony capitalism. And so, but a lot of that is just dealing with the policy on the merits. For example, we talked about the big omnibus bills. if you dealt with that on an up or down vote as an individual issue, it'd have a hard time justifying itself. But if it's part of a 1,000-page bill, then it can sneak in there. So that's part of the problem that we see with a lot of this stuff.
Then can you implement a bill to stop the conflict of interest? And if you own land, you can't be on the agriculture committee. If you own a bank, you can't be on the banking committee. Why? Because you're profiting from it to the tune of taxpayer money.
How about if your spouse owns the
banking
company?
stuff, I mean, there are a lot of ethics rules. I'm not sure that you can do that. In terms of how the farmers work, they're allowed to continue under our ethics. Like for me, I can't go out and make, I can't go out and have another job. It's like ethically I can make some money, but like military, I don't even get the military pay anymore. I just drill for points. But and so you're limited. But if you're agriculture, I know you're kind of grandfathered in where you can continue to farm. So I think that may be part of it. So I just have to look at the ethics rules. But for me, it's just bad policy to be doing the direct payments. Yes, sir.
What do you think the chances are of a delay in a competitive bid on Medicare?
Well, a lot of us have supported changing that. We don't think it's.
What was the question?
So this is about this competitive bidding program that was put in for Medicare. Was supposed to, kind of lower costs, but it's actually causing costs to go up, and it's actually harming a lot of people who are in the system. So a lot of us have supported changes and reforms to that. But ultimately, it's going to be somebody, Sebelius or people at CMS, are going to have to make a decision on that. So I know there's a lot of support for that in Congress, but we can't do it anything short of legislation. And maybe there will be legislation that actually comes to the House floor.
2375.
Yeah, but I don't know I don't know if that's going to be something that the House and Senate leadership are going to put on. They may or may not. So. Yes, ma'am. So this is basically a comment about the immigration bill, and basically the argument was made that if you legalize people who are in the country illegally, that they'll start to pay taxes, so it'll be good for the economy, overall. And my view on that is, I think immigration properly channeled. So, for example, we just did a high-tech visa reform that streamlines that process. Gets people with a lot of skills, people who can help create jobs here. I mean, I think that can be pro-growth. But when the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, looked at the Senate bill, they said because so many of the people who are illegal are going to be low-wage and low-skilled, that it's actually going to depress wages and increase unemployment. So that's a problem. And I think there's a lot of, if you look at the last 6 or 7 years with the economy, you have a lot of kind of blue-collar folks who have not seen more opportunity. They haven't seen their wages go up at all. And that's just the problem. And I think it's a problem overall. I mean, building the Keystone Pipeline, creating more manufacturing jobs. We've got to give those folks some more opportunity as well. Yes, sir.
My pensions were TWA. American Airlines took us over. They filed for bankruptcy. Are allowed, I think it's over $2 billion worth of new aircraft, merged with US Air. Now they're handing out a $20 million bonus to Mr. Horner. They're failing. And there's a 2005 Congressional code that you're not allowed to do that unless you pay all the full-time employees. And then doing this, on top of that, now that I've worked my whole life, promise benefits and medical benefits, that's on the table with Judge Wayne, the bankruptcy court, has dropped them. 40,000 retirees will lose their pensions and go into the Obamacare system. I mean, how is that even allowed?
This is bankruptcy of which airline?
American Airlines.
Oh, so with in terms of the merger with US Air.
Now, I've written to you, I've written to Senator Nelson, I've written to Senator King, saying the attitude, you know, every letter I receive has the same response. Don't worry, your pension is safe. Yeah. Never mention my pension. What does that tell our communications with our representatives and the incentives to tell your children work hard? What is that telling everybody?
Well, one, I mean, you know, you work hard, you know, what's legally due to you, you should get. And so, you know, I know that these companies, you know, there are changes in the corporate structures or whatever. In terms of if there's violation of the law, you know, then obviously there are legal remedies. And if that's not successful, I mean, Congress can conduct oversight, although it's hard in an individual case, you know, to force different action. So I haven't been, you know, I understand that this is going on, but it's not been an issue that we've necessarily had in front of the Congress yet.
That's what I'm saying. I've been writing for the last year. I mean, I've been going through the ad, saying something like this should even be on the table.
Right.
You can't afford to give what was promised, but you can get new planes, merge with another company, pay a $20 million bonus to the outgoing CEO who failed. What are you telling everyone?
So basically, I'm just going to let them know. Gentlemen concerned about the merger with U.S. Air and American Airlines, how that could affect some of the health insurance benefits that have been earned over the course. So we appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, but with all the scandals and cheating and lying that's going on with the IRS, isn't this a perfect opportunity to get behind a abolish the IRS movement? I understand Ted Cruz has done that. I was hoping you would get behind something like that. It's the only way I could see our country getting any kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I'm behind it. I think that when you look at the amount of misconduct in the IRS, it goes beyond just rogue employees making some bad choices. I mean, there's a systemic arrogance and contempt for the American people that they've demonstrated. This new commissioner, I think, is not off to a good start at all, and basically he's just exonerating the entire agency. And I just, you know, it's not an acceptable situation by any stretch. Well, you know, we've been talking, so this is about the IRS and some of the misconduct. You know, we've been talking about how we're going, you know, doing oversight in Congress. We're trying to get the facts, educate the public, but ultimately, you know, if someone's committed criminal misconduct, you know, you need the Justice Department to hold them to account, or a special prosecutor. So we in Congress, as a legislative branch, you know, that's not something that's in our purview.
You can't ask the Justice Department to do it?
Oh, well, of course we can ask, and the response to that is going to be, oh yeah, we'll take that under advisement. And so you're probably not going to get very far, you know, with any of that. So we appreciate it. Yes, sir. So this is a question about so it's a question about kind of some of the contracting involving the government and crony capitalism. Well, look, there's a lot of crony capitalism going on in the system, and the reason that it is, I think, is because, you know, you can have people ask for a special benefit for like this company, this industry, this group, and then the cost of that is basically just borne by the taxpayer as a whole. So the average taxpayer, you know, they don't necessarily have somebody in Washington defending their interests. Some of this stuff is driven by parochial politics. I mean, for example, if you have somebody, if you're in, I don't know, Missouri somewhere, and they're building a particular platform, you're going to have political support to try to do that, even though that may not necessarily be the best in the best interest of the force. I understand that, but Congress, what I'm trying to say is there are people who are motivated to support certain programs or whatever based on jobs in their district or for other reasons other than necessarily what's needed for national security.
Well, lobbyists.
Right now, we're lobbyists.
Well, I think if you look at of the 10 wealthiest counties in the country, 7 of the 10 are in the Washington, D.C. area. That was much different than what it was during the founding, when the founding fathers established Washington as the federal district. It was a swamp, basically. I mean, you would not have had that many people. Okay, so we got 2 more questions. So okay, right here. Yep.
It would seem that one of the best remedies for our problems with the IRS would be to eliminate the need for the IRS. And I would suggest that as a co-sponsor of the fair tax bill, H.R. 25, which you have already signed on to, that would be the best way to eliminate the need for the IRS. By eliminating the income tax entirely, repeal the 16th Amendment, and pass the fair tax. There was in Congressman Chairman Kemp's committee in House Ways and Means. It's been there ever since the beginning of this session of Congress. It was there in the previous session of Congress. What is going on behind the scenes in terms of tax writing, tax reform, and tax replacement?
So this is a question about tax reform. We've seen the IRS and the amount of power that they have over Americans and the misconduct and malfeasance that you've seen. So, what can be done about that? Can you have like bold tax reform that goes to a consumption single rate? And then there's even people say, at least a flat income tax would get rid of.
You still
some
need
of
an
this
IRS
stuff.
if you have an income tax.
Well, I mean, you're going to need a collection agency. You will need something with the consumption. But here's what's going on. I think there's basically a lot of tepid, nibble around the edges types of reforms that are being offered. And I think the reason for that is, a lot of people will complain about the IRS, but at the end of the day, politicians like having a 70,000-page tax code because that gives them the power to compel behavior, influence behavior, so that if you behave the way a politician wants you to behave, then they'll reward you with a tax benefit. And that obviously isn't a good thing for the country. But people in Washington, what I've found is they do not want to give up their power willingly. And so, it's going to
people in Washington.
No, I agree, but it's going to take, it's a long road to really move. And once you start talking about tax reform, there's nothing that motivates people on K Street more than protecting whatever goodies that they have, in the code.
Just another reason.
That's just the way it is. Yes.
Congressman, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service. What are your top legislative priorities for this session?
Well, my top priorities are restoring economic growth, and that doesn't mean we're going to pass a stimulus bill, say, oh, we're going to create jobs. It means structuring the economy. It means passing legislation that's going to create a pro-growth environment that will allow the economy to do better. And we still are not really out of the woods. I mean, we kind of do these little blips. The market's done better, but we're not where we need to be in terms of energy. We're not where we need to be in terms of high-skilled jobs. So there's a lot that we need to do. So we've done things like, pass the Northern Route Approval Act so that you can do the Keystone Pipeline that creates 15,000 jobs. And guess what? When you create 15,000 jobs, private sector jobs, those people pay taxes, so the government actually gets more revenue. When you pay royalties for that, the government will get more revenue. So it's actually a way, to raise revenue without imposing higher tax rates on people, which I think are good. We're also working on dealing with some of the fallout that we've talked about today with the health care, with Dodd-Frank, and with some of these things, because what's happening is it's having a disproportionate effect on small businesses. So for example, Dodd-Frank said we're going to deal with too big to fail, these big banks. if you look at who's really affected by that, it's the small banks and the individual communities who are having to comply with all this stuff. So if you can provide some relief there, they wouldn't have to spend as much time dealing with compliance, and they'd have a little bit more capital to be able to lend to somebody in the community. If you're a small business person in a community, you're not going to get Citibank to want to loan you money for a small business problem. I mean, they're doing much bigger things, so you got to have somebody locally who's able to do that. Then I think if you actually get the budget under control, show people that we have a path to balance, I think that will create confidence in the economy. I think that will be good in terms of the medium and long term going forward. The problem and the frustration that's been is if you look at a lot of the issues that have put forward since the president was inaugurated for a second term, none of them have really touched on any of that stuff. And so it's frustrating because I think that this is one of the worst recoveries we've had in modern times, and yet we are shooting ourselves in the foot with some of our policies. And so it's a frustrating thing. Then finally, I would say, there is a need to reform Congress. I've talked about things like no budget, no pay. I think that was a good thing to do. I believe in getting rid of congressional pensions. I decline my pension, but we should get rid of them for every member of Congress, because you don't want to have a separate ruling class that gets treated better than the rest of the citizens. I think we should ban Congress from ever exempting itself from the operation of general laws. That is not what the Founding Fathers intended, but yet this is developed where sometimes people get up there and they think that they don't have to abide by the same rules as everybody else. So economic growth, recovering American vitality, and then reforming the institutions of government, have been my priorities. The frustrating thing is I don't get to decide which bills come to the floor, and so we're at the mercy of leadership in both parties in that respect. So yes, sir.
2009, I got hurt at work and I went on compensation. 2011, we settled the case. Obama is charging me to be covered under his health care plan. He took my settlement, $46,000, for him to cover me. Pre-existing conditions I thought was covered. I'm still going to be judged on higher rates also because of my pre-existing condition. I'm going to pay a higher premium. And he took my money, $46,000. I come out of 2.5 years of being hurt, forced into retirement that I didn't want to go into. He takes my settlement. I walked away with $10,000 when the case was settled after paying the lawyer and Obama. $10,000.
Well, I appreciate that. So basically this gentleman said that he had a workers' comp issue, got a settlement, but then this was 2009, and then with the passage of the health care law, he's essentially had to give that money to the government and has not been able to recoup what he should have, so he's expressing his frustration with that. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I had a question about some upcoming legislation. The student loan rate has doubled. I think one of the most important things for our country is for young people to be able to get education and be able to afford it. And affordability has become a problem. It takes 20 years for the person who gets a degree to be able to pay it off. And our loan rates, the student loan rates doubled. So that has to be addressed before the school year starts in the fall, or it's going to really impact a lot of people who are trying to better themselves through education. What are you going to do about that? It has to.
Well, the House already passed a bill that addressed it, and basically it borrowed. I mean, even the president agreed when the government's, basically the student loans have essentially been nationalized, so the interest rate just has to have a relation to what government borrows with treasuries. And so in the president's budget and what we did, it sets that relationship. What Congress had done previously is just do it through politics, and they reduced the rate artificially, saying, okay, this is just a one-year reprieve, and they extended it. So what we want to do is take politics out of it. But the bigger issue than the interest rate...
What do you want to tie it to?
The treasury.
The Treasury, the rate?
10-year
so
Treasury.
How much more would it be than the Treasury rate?
It's, I think it was, well, I think it's Treasury plus the proposals are between 2 and 2.5, something like. But here's the issue with the. So this is a question about student loans and the cost of college. Government's policies with respect to loans, not necessarily the interest rate. How do universities react to that when they see that there's loan money available?
Raise their rates.
Do they lower their tuition or do they raise their tuition? They raise their tuition. And what you've seen over the last, 10 years ago there was about $300 billion in outstanding student loan debt. Now there's $1 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. So and there's not an accident for that. Yes, there is more demand for college than there may have been 50 years ago. So it's not all because of that. But colleges see that this is available, they raise it, and so if you're a student and you're $10,000 short, you get a $10,000 loan, but then they raise tuition by $6,000, you haven't benefited by the $10,000, you benefited by $4,000, so you're still, and so we've created this. These colleges, if you look at the administrative staffs of a lot of these colleges, they have ballooned over the last 10 years. So you have, this provost, this administrator, this, that, these are people making six-figure salaries. And so what we need to do with loans, well, one, we got to develop more of a private market as well. Government shouldn't nationalize this. But two, is colleges need to be held accountable when they accept this money. So if you're not graduating people, a decent percentage of people in 4 years, then you should be penalized and you should be on the hook for part of that loan and not just put it on the taxpayer. There are a whole host of different reforms that we can do to put downward pressure on the price of college. There was one study that said 1/3 of everybody who takes out student loans does not end up getting a degree. So that is to me is the worst, because you're now in debt however much, you don't have a degree, so you're basically starting out where you would have been in the first place. And so, and I think, I met with some folks who do some phosphate stuff in Central Florida recently, and they were telling me how the people who are kind of the baby boomers and a little younger than that who are retiring, who are their manual skilled workforce, they're getting ready to retire, and there's a big shortage of people who have actual vocational skills. And so what I want to do is just tell people, yes, college can obviously be good, but there's vocational training can be good. There are whole different ways where you can acquire skills to be productive. And guess what? If you have a vocational skill to do something, construction or whatever, that's something that can't be sent overseas, because you got to do it here. And so if you develop these skills, you are going to have the ability to do well for yourself over the long term. But the idea that you can't be successful unless you get a 4-year degree, a lot of these colleges are putting out degrees that are not worth the paper that they're printed on. And going and studying some exotic studies that nobody's ever heard of or whatever, that is not going to guarantee you a high income. What's going to get you a high income is having skills, whether that's through a university program that you can do engineering or some of this other stuff, or whether it's through a vocational program. But the idea that simply having a piece of paper guarantees you success, I think we've seen that that's not true. You're already starting to see some of the graduate schools, the enrollment starting to decline. Law schools, for example, because these kids are taking out $100,000 in loans. They get out, they can't get a job in the legal profession. They end up bartending. And so there's going to be a correction. I think there is in some respects. But the bottom line is government policy should not be artificially increasing the cost of college. We should be doing it more transparency, consumer choice, so that it actually makes college more affordable. Simply doing more loans to reach higher and higher tuition, that's not really more affordable. It just means you're going to have to pay back more once you start doing that. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, Congressman DeSantis, this question is relative to the illegal immigration issue.
Yep.
I work for an emergency physician group, emergency medicine. Something has to be done. We can't continue as we have. Whether we agree or disagree with all the details in the current considered piece of legislation, it doesn't mean we shouldn't come up with something. We have to see everyone, regardless of ability to pay. That's a federal law for the emergency departments across America. We're getting our ERs clogged with these folks.
What do we do? How are we going to get them paying into our system instead of giving them free medical care, free education? We can't afford this anymore.
So the question is about medical care for people who are in the country illegally, and you know, something with immigration, something needs to be done. You know, when people say something needs to be done, that shouldn't mean anything is acceptable, because Congress has proven that when it tries to address certain problems, it can actually create new problems and make some problems worse. So the idea that no matter what, we just got to do something and let the chips, you got to do judicious policy. I will say that one of the concerns I have as it relates to medical care with this Senate bill is that people who are in the country illegally, who are granted legal status, are exempted from Obamacare. So what that means is if you are an employee, who's going to be cheaper to have on your rolls? An American citizen where Obamacare applies, or somebody who's been given legal status and exempted? And you're talking about $3,000 to $5,000 per employee. So they're unwittingly creating an incentive to essentially not have as many current Americans on your workforce. And to me, any bill you do, you have to satisfy yourself that that's going to be in the interest of the American people. Now, emergency care generally, not just with people who are in the country illegally, but just American citizens who go in, you know, obviously, if someone's in an emergency, you're going to see them. You're not going to try to figure out what their bank statement is or whatever. But people should take some responsibility for this. And I understand you have different people, various means, but to just have a mechanism where somebody, you know, maybe a small allotment from the wages or something, so that you have a stake in what you're doing, and what that could maybe do is incentivize people to take some more precautions going down. I think too many people think that somehow, you know, they have a right to have people do medical care for them, and I think it's more of a responsibility that we all have to make sure that we're pulling our own weight going forward. So, all right, one more question. Yes, ma'am. So basically the comment was, you know, just about rule of law as respects to immigration, but then also, you know, not willing to give members a benefit of the doubt for laws that they pass. And you're absolutely right. Any law that people sign on to, you know, if they choose not to read it, they're responsible for having done it. And you are absolutely, not only within your rights, it's your duty to hold people responsible for the decisions that they make and what they decide to put their name next to. That's why, you know, and I'm going to close. I really appreciate you guys coming, but I just wanted to say, you know, we have people contact our office. You know, I don't have a big staff.